So I'm going to do lightning fast introductions to both of us. So I'm Ollie. I am community manager at CAPTCHA, which is a no-code company, but I'm also a general kind of no-code enthusiast. I've built a bunch of products using no-code tools. I'm kind of a failed software engineer, so I found that no-code kind of worked for me when it comes to building. And that's me. We'll come back to me in a wee bit. Wojtek, do you want to go quickly?
Sure. My name is Wojtek Kutyla, and I run a company called Human Thing Limited. We are a little accessibility and digital design consultancy based in Edinburgh. By saying we, it's me plus some other folk, but generally it's mostly me. So, that's what I've been doing for the last few years. I think because of my involvement with so many weird companies, big and small, I'm in a good position to talk to you about accessibility today.
Awesome. Yeah.
Awesome.
So you're kind of covering you're the expert in accessibility, and I'm the kind of no-code person, and we're going to kind of sort of join forces to make this happen. So yeah, today in the first, it's like you're psychic, thank you. In the first half hour, we're going to go over a brief overview of no-code. Not going to spend too much time on that. We want to really get into sort of the accessibility side of things. We're going to have about half hour, 35 minutes for that, and there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So do save your questions until the end of that section, just so we can get through the bits that we need to do. And once we've done the Q&A, we'll have about 10, 15 minutes or so for breakout rooms. So if you want to stick around to talk about what you've learned today and introduce yourselves to the rest of the no-code community, you can do that. And we'll finish at about 1:45. So yeah, that's what we're going to cover. And yeah, I'm going to quickly just go over a lightning fast introduction to what no-code is. This first definition here, building software with visual interfaces and human language, that's not the official definition of no-code. Ask 100 no-coders what it is and you'll get 100 different answers. But loosely speaking, I think we have this idea that you can now build software, and you've been able to do this for a while, but I think it's reached a level of maturity. You can build software where you can drag and drop elements in a graphical interface. You can say, when this button is clicked, do this thing instead. And you can kind of talk to it almost in a sort of human type language, rather than writing code that, line after line. We all know what code looks like, hundreds or thousands of lines of code appearing in front of you, way more lines of code than that. So it's a slight change in how you are able to build software. And there's a lot of use cases for it. Many of you will probably build websites with it. Squarespace and Webflow are big examples of that. Apps, I think Bubble is perhaps the leader in the web app side of things right now. And mobile development tools as well. And if someone's able to mute that person, that'd be awesome. But also things like games and chatbots and things. There's a whole wealth of new tools that are coming out. And frankly, it feels like every other day there's a new sort of no-code tool that allows you to build a new thing coming out. But today we're going to focus on kind of specifically the sort of web apps, websites, mobile apps. That it expands a bit beyond that, like mailing lists and things like that. But we're not going to be talking about games or chatbots or AI, things like that. This is more a sort of overview of a bunch of that type of tool. And I think it's really important that we do have these conversations about accessibility in no-code, because I'm in this really privileged position where I get to see all of the kind of people who are building with no-code, like the people at CAPTCHA or, the no-code community. And it's, someone this morning was telling me about their sort of yacht business that they now, built a no-code tool for. You hear about beekeepers or cattle ranchers, all of these new builders and creators who are creating software for their businesses. And that's awesome. It's kind of lowered the level of access required to build software. But with this new cohort of builders, we also need to talk about how important accessibility is. And I'm going to let Wojtek talk about what accessibility is and how to get it right in a bit. But for me, like the level of education out there and no-code and accessibility, like we need to boost that massively. I think the big one for me was when I went on YouTube and searched for no-code accessibility, and there's nothing. There's literally like not a single video. Whereas if you search for code accessibility, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of videos, that you can go and watch to learn about this. And I'm not saying there's no content at all about this topic, but I think that there's more that we can do to get those conversations going. And yeah, we have a long way to go in terms of educating people on accessibility best practices when it comes to no-code tools. And just to say, we're not going to cover all tools today. We just can't, and they're all so different, and have different levels of what you can and can't change in terms of accessibility. So we're not going to focus on a specific tool. not your favorite, we're not going to use Bubble or Webflow or something like that. We're just going to give a sort of general overview of what best practice looks like when it comes to building. And yeah, I think that is it for my section, kind of introduction.
That is you indeed, Oli. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'll hand over to Wojtek and go into the chat to say hi.
Thank you very much. Okay, folks. So yeah, like Oli said, today we're going to be talking about accessibility. One of the most important bits to remember is that this is really a conversation starter. Like Oli said, it's impossible to cover even the very basics within the time we have. So when we were kind of thinking about this, we mostly thought about it as something that would maybe generate more interest, generate your enthusiasm, would make you think. So we would really welcome any sort of opinions, views, anything on that piece afterwards, whether in the discussion or post webinar. But anyway, let's go on to onto the topic of accessibility. Let's talk about it a little. I think it's worth understanding first what accessibility is. And essentially accessibility is, something that ensures that anyone can use things that we build, whether with real code or no code, doesn't really matter. These are the things that people will be used by many people around the world, and more people can use it, the better. At the same time, we have multiple users, multiple people who live with disabilities, who are marginalized in many ways, and those folks also have to have access to what we do. And we say that a solution is accessible when it can be just confidently used, when we can access all functionality of it this or the other way, which means that we have. But it's also inclusive when the person who's using it feels comfortable. Practically speaking, accessibility, inclusive design, all that stuff is a part of user experience, as much as the user experience is a part of something much wider, which is the quality of service, customer experience, service design, you name it. Essentially, these all things are inseparable nowadays. Technology is so close to us that we just have to make sure that we are taking care of the coherent experience. To give you the best example, you might be building a website on Webflow or an app with Bubble, and it might happen that it is okay to be used by majority of people, and then you find customers you wouldn't even know about that would, let's say, have reduced mobility, or maybe would have to live with some cognitive impairment, and they might not be able to benefit from your solution fully. You can do very little things, very simple things to prevent that from happening, but you need to know about them. Hence, we are here today. Right. So why is it actually important when we talk about numbers and other things? Roughly 10 billion people around the world live with some form of disability. So that's quite a few people, really. And even if you think about it, it's just so many of potential customers. So we can get into the moral aspect of it, obviously, and we should. But even if you look at it from the perspective of just how big is this market, it's just immense, Every 2 in 5 people, roughly, according to stats, will develop some sort of disability in their lifetime. So, some of them are us, some of them are our friends, our family members, close ones, loved ones. It's impossible to predict that. Accessibility is something that is very hard to report on in the web, in a way that, technologies such as Google Analytics won't really tell you how many people who use assistive technologies are using your website, other than, let's say, most of them would use a keyboard, for instance, which is one of the most basic assistive technologies, or a mouse, even though the mouse looks like a chopping board for vegetables. So it's worth remembering about that, assistive technologies and people with disabilities are all around us everywhere, and we need to care for them. There's also a particular reason for it when it comes to the law. So we have in European Union already the EAA directive, but it's going to be kind of expanded by further additions, and in 2005 it will be mandatory for all e-commerce or digital organizations to serve their services in accessible fashion. So that includes, you, me, Oli, everyone who's basically having customers in European Union, even though they might be based in UK or United States. In the States, though, you have sections 504, 508, and those sections are responsible for mandating exactly the same thing, and they are also being expanded to the commercial sector, like, fully. So there will be no escape route. Like, we'll have to take care of accessibility, mainly for the reason that, we all recognize that we're just getting older, less healthy, and we need some of those solutions. Accessibility means mainly speed of use, ease of use, better market penetration, but also actually improved SEO. Google and other search engines, they prioritize accessible solutions, mainly because accessible solutions are built on the basis of semantic HTML, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. So, you can only win on this. Like you can really lose, and you cannot really lose anything from investing time into making your solution accessible. It's only benefits for everyone. We make them time proof by that. It's something that you would be able to use in years to come. In some ways, you're actually doing it for yourself, maybe, who knows, or for people that It's just worth it, generally worth it. Accessibility, when done right, improves usability altogether. So there's nothing that you could lose, only, practical gains from that. Now, so it's worth knowing how this all works. Accessibility really is all about standards. We have something like called WCAG, WCAG, in place, and that's basically created. That's a set of guidelines created by the W3C consortium, those folks who invented, the HTML language, CSS, and a couple of other things. And this is an advice on how to make and build accessible solutions for everyone. And that's for content creators, front-end developers, graphic designers, UI designers, you name them, anyone who basically touches the web or touches mobile apps, that's for them. And it's a very important set of rules. They are a de facto standard. They are not written in stone, but there's nothing better, and there shouldn't be, because that comes from the originating source. So, it's excellent. And all these kind of law and all regulations, they often refer to it, and it's all based on a technical aspect of HTML, where HTML, really, hypertext markup language, the thing that websites are built from, should really be made semantic, which means that most of all, separation happens between the content and the presentation. Presentation is the CSS, cascading style sheets. This is what makes websites like kind of look the way they look, that separation allows us basically to specify a particular structure, a particular source for any sort of presentation. So you can have a website that today is yellow and all fonts are green, and then tomorrow it could all be blue, easy with a click, basically. And that kind of transpires very well into the no-code promise, where you don't really have to worry much about how something works from inside. However, it's worth remembering that the structure of HTML is crucial here. All tags have their meaning, and they should be used accordingly. So this is the best part. In most no-code tools that I've seen, especially things like Webflow, where you can really take control over HTML source, you're actually totally able to do it right. There are all tools in place to make sure that tags that you are choosing are the correct tags, that, you can describe all labels, all alternative descriptions for images, all that sort of stuff is in there. People just aren't doing it because they don't know about it. So the funny bit is that if you look at the webflow.com website as such, and if you start moving around it with assistive technologies such as keyboard, or if you run it past a screen reader, which reads the text out loud to those who can see, it'll be pretty much accessible. It's not excellent, but it's good. And then you go into something like, let's say, Webflow Awards for 2022, and I went there and I checked a number of, the top websites. None of them are accessible. So it's kind of funny. It's like, the tools are there, and Webflow folks, of course, they know about it because they've built them. But, it's like, it's just unknown in the community, really, and nobody really pays attention, mainly because of lack of education on the matter. I never assume that people are evil and they aren't doing it because they don't care. Of course, it's not that. It's just that they don't know. So we're here to tell them how to do it. So, generally, the level of accessibility when it comes to no code is unfortunately pretty low. And this applies to mobile apps as well. If you, let's say, run your mobile app through something like VoiceOver on your iOS phone or TalkBack on Android, those are screen readers too, you'll probably recognize that not everything works as it should. Those are things that you can actually do yourself. Just try them and test them. But in general, it's because some of those principles actually also apply to mobile development, and we're not thinking about it too often. So it's the same story. The general issue that I see everywhere, the main issue is that it's very hard to use these things, whether websites or mobile apps, with something else than a mouse or a fully kind of articulated hand. So generally, people who experience any sort of or some sort of impairments would be using keyboard to navigate. That's sometimes the easiest way for them to do stuff. with. And if our websites aren't accessible to keyboard, then, you know, they are not accessible altogether. We need to pay attention to this. I see it quite a lot in the no-code community where, you know, websites and other solutions aren't really accessible in that way. Then there's a structure of elements, you know, the information architecture. A proper website should have headings in place, should have paragraphs in place. I'm going to talk to you about this in a minute. The structure is important not only for those who use assistive technologies, but also for solutions that actually crawl the content, like Google that I mentioned earlier, or for the purpose of repurposing the content and parsing it with something different. So you have those tools like Zapier and whatnot. They actually also rely on proper structure of content very often, you know, on properly built forms and many other things. Information architecture is very important, and it's important both for web and for the mobile, and it's worth keeping in mind. And this means, where is the information and how can I find it? How easily can I find it and distinguish it? What's the most important bit on the screen? What's the second most important bit, and what is least important? You know, I should be able to establish this just by running my technology past it. It isn't always super easy when things are built with no code. So what is really important is that sometimes accessibility is being sold as something that prevents people from doing things that look nice, yeah, which is completely not the case. I mean, majority of what you build every day can be as beautiful as only you want it to be, you know, perfectly designed, really colorful and whatnot. There are just some simple rules to keep in mind. Of course, you know, it gets more advanced as you start looking at it in detail, but in general, it isn't really that difficult. You know, it's just, we need to remember about keeping simple rules and then we can maintain our visual quality. The rest will be basically history. So I have a number of tips for you, very simple tips on what to do, mainly with the website stuff, because that's where accessibility suffers the most at the moment, to make your solutions better. You can follow them, you know, you can ask us later to tell you more about them, find us whenever, and we'll be happy to help. So first of all, it's to do with the structure of content. In HTML, there's a number of special tags that are called headings, H tags, H1, H2, H3, all the way down to H6. Although if your website really needs H6, it probably means that you need to rethink your information architecture. That's quite dense and deep. But anyway, don't skip headings and just use one H1 per page. You can also potentially use one H1 per section, but there's a debate around that because it complicates the experience of screen reader users. So just use one H1 per page and then go with H2s, H3s, and so on accordingly. Don't skip them. Make sure that the structure makes sense. Think of it as a book or a newspaper. The title, subtitles, you know, titles above individual paragraphs, all that sort of jazz. That could be used quite easily and effectively. Then the keyboard access, and this is fairly simple. In HTML, there are two tags that are by definition clickable, apart from forms, which have also like clickable form fields. This is href for links and button for buttons. And just use them accordingly. So, you know, whenever you're building something, try not to reinvent the wheel and don't use things that people haven't seen before. If it's a link, make it a link. Don't make it a huge box with something in it. You know, make it a button if it's a button. This is all to do with mental models and, you know, affordances of patterns that we remember. So we need to be able to quickly recognize what is it that we want to click on and just undertake the action. Make sure that keyboard focus is visible. You can take care of it with CSS, in Webflow, in Squarespace, whenever you can actually specify how the focus looks. And, you know, it's just to do with adding a little border around the active element, something that people would be able to recognize. And the easiest bit is at the end, disconnect your mouse or don't use your trackpad and just use your keyboard on the website and see whether you can actually move from element to element. Tab moves you forward, Shift Tab moves you back. Space and Enter do stuff. Same goes for arrows. If you can use those keys on your website, if you can get to any place on your website with those keys, you are fine. If you are on a mobile, see if this works with a screen reader. Actually, attaching a pointing device to your mobile might be difficult, so you can skip that. But, you know, just kind of sensibly check whether you really do need a full hand movement to use everything. If you do, well, maybe think about things to change. So, okay. Then another thing I see very often, especially in Europe and in the United Kingdom, are the GDPR or cookie messages that are actually, you know, on the bottom of the code tree. So like if you were to open the website's code, you would see that they are somewhere on the bottom. And the result of that is that if somebody uses the navigation through keyboard or uses a screen reader, they will never get to that. So potentially you would actually have customers who are almost illegally using a website because they're not informed about those cookies that are being saved because they can't see them, you know? What happens sometimes as well is pop-ups, large pop-ups obscuring a part of a screen. And then the keyboard focus is actually trapped underneath as well, you know, so you can keep moving with a tab or whatever underneath that pop-up and you'll never see it. I mean, you'll never hear it if you're listening to it. You can't act on it. Remember that such things should always be on the top of the code tree. So they would be the first thing the person stumbles upon. And where they are displayed on the page is secondary thing because you can actually move it anywhere with CSS. So, you know, your code might have them at the beginning, your CSS can move it anywhere, to the bottom, to the right, wherever you feel appropriate. So just keep that in mind. And then that's something we were discussing with Oli earlier, CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA is really the evil of all evils in the internet. If anyone experiences any form of disability, actually CAPTCHA for them is like a, you know, nemesis. This is really, really bad. Why? Because it often requires you to use visual recognition on things which you might not have. Sometimes you have to hear things which you can't do. It's very difficult to use it with hands, you know, sometimes very difficult to use it without the mouse. It's generally terrible. And unfortunately, CAPTCHA is the invention of lazy developers and nothing else. You know, you can actually totally bypass it, use two simple techniques of honeypot or timestamp. There's a number of other techniques. You know, if there's no other way, just use a simple question. You know, what's 7 + 5? Or what is the capital of United Kingdom? And let people type. Simple things that require us to use brain if it's absolutely necessary. But generally, try not to do the standard CAPTCHA and the reCAPTCHA from Google, you know, where you have to kind of use select tractors or like, you know, I don't know, cats or whatever. This really is a bad thing, you know. Find a person who's using a screen reader, a person who can see, you know, and have them to use that. They will just, you know, they won't like it. I assure you, it's really not a good thing to have.
Do you mind explaining what a honeypot is?
Honeypot, yeah. So honeypot and timestamp, if we were to summarize it super quickly, honeypot is a field embedded in a form that's hidden that a person wouldn't see or a screen reader wouldn't react to or assistive technology wouldn't react to. But we can check whether it's been filled during the form submission. And if it has been filled, then it means it's a robot, you know? And when it comes to timestamp, this is an easy thing. You basically open the form and you note down somewhere, you know, the time when the form was open, and then you measure it against the time of submission. And if it's just a fraction of a second or something like that, again, this is a robot, you know, so it's not even really that complicated. It can be totally done. It's just that often we just don't care because, you know, to plug in Google CAPTCHA is just easier. Well, it's easier for us, but not necessarily easier for people who are going to be using it. Right. Then non-text elements, images, charts, graphs, all sorts of stuff, you know, they should have alternative text descriptions because not everybody would be able to see them or understand them easily. So, you know, this is to do with things like showing somebody a chart and giving them access to a table that actually describes what's on this chart. Super simple, super important. This is to do with images that should have appropriate descriptions that tell people what happens on an image. You know, it's like here you have dog running in the park, and that's something that's going to be read out. If it's empty, like on the second line of the yellow code, this is going to be ignored by assistive technologies. That image isn't going to pop up anywhere. But if it's empty, like the one on the bottom, that's actually going to read out the URL. Now, imagine that you have a URL that keeps like the session data in it or whatever, or a name that has 200 characters. Crazy. And that's all going to be read out. So we need to make sure that decorative images we declare with something like CSS or hide from assistive technologies, and always add descriptions of what happens there on those images, because not everybody would be able actually to see them. And even though, let's say, Google and other technologies get much better now with recognition of images, they are still not perfect, as we know from some sad examples of AI recognizing particular individuals in a wrong way. Let's just not do it, you know. Alternative text for everything is mandatory. The same for form elements that should have labels. So if you think of a web form, and, you know, web is pretty much made of forms and videos, really, for the most of it, or images, you know, forms should have labels. And very often you'd see forms that only have placeholders. If I put my cursor in a field with a placeholder, it disappears. I might not know what it is to do with, especially if the form is long, especially if, let's say, I need more time to process information. Give every field a distinct label that informs the person about the purpose of the field. Placeholders might be good looking, but they really aren't that user-friendly, right? It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using them altogether. We might be using them, but we need to be mindful, and we might, let's say, hide labels in the code. So it's being recognized by assistive technologies, but just not seen. This isn't ideal though, because if somebody loses the context of what's happening in the form by clicking in the field and losing the placeholder, where you might lose a customer, So all of that is really important. And it's very simple. The yellow code shows you this. This label is for the field first name, and it's associated with it by the combination of for and ID. And that's it, as simple as that. And then it tells the person, what's your first name? It asks them to enter the first name. Nothing more complicated than this. Super simple and very, very helpful. And the click here links, I mean, I tend to joke that whenever you use click here link, the god, kills a kitten basically, because this is just so evil. The problem with click here links is that they don't mean anything outside of the context when they're taken away from the context. So, if you rely on assistive technology that is reading the screen out to you, for instance, sometimes you might be going through the website with just links, traveling through links. Imagine hearing, click here link, click here link, click here link, click here link. Like, it doesn't do anything, How about saying, give my NoCode app link a try? That's so much better. Or, look at photographs of kittens, link. That's so much better than click here links. So please do not use click here links if you absolutely don't have to. And to be honest, I cannot imagine a single instance when you really have to. The general rule is that a link, a call to action, or a button for that matter, the same, should really inform the person about the intent of an action that they're going to undertake. What's going to happen if they do it? They're going to submit, edit, add. Well, submit is a bad label, doesn't mean anything. Add, edit, delete, cancel, whatever, see photographs, anything. It should really make sense to a person. And then please avoid playing media automatically. I know it's super funky, but trust me, this can be a real pain. Imagine that you are perceiving the world on the internet through your headphones, or maybe you suffer from epileptic seizures and you're getting some animation played like that instantly. You can really harm people by doing that. It's really not great. General rule here is that users should always be in control of any content that is auditory in any way, visual or audio. They should be able to actually control it. So stop it when they want to, start it when they want to. And of course, if they specify, yes, play my videos automatically on a Facebook timeline as they do, or, in your app, it's all good, but give them that option up front and ask them whether they want to have this, because most of them won't really want to do that, so it's really worth remembering that you can actually, unfortunately, do some real harm by doing this. And I see a lot of it in the internet. It's not pretty. So just, make it easy. So generally, to kind of close off, test your websites and apps. That's the best thing you can do. Before you show it to people, disconnect your mouse, maybe disconnect your keyboard, run it past a screen reader. If you are on iOS or macOS, you have VoiceOver built in. If you are on Windows, you have Microsoft Narrator. You can also download NVDA, which is free and excellent. If you are on Linux, you also have NVDA, and you can actually use this to see whether the bare minimum requirements are met. Then maybe see what happens if you enlarge the screen a lot, maybe your website breaks in an unexpected fashion and a person wouldn't be able to see what's happening on it, See whether with your app, you can actually turn it into horizontal mode, or does it only work vertically? Some people use it in horizontal mode because it's so much easier for them because of their, limited movement abilities. So all these things you can test. And the best part you can do is to observe your customers as they're using them and ask them questions, how this is coming across to you. How does this work for you? Are there any issues that you're seeing? And you'll actually discover that many people who use your applications and, web apps, mobile apps, whatever you call them, hybrid apps, they actually need some special solutions. And really, it isn't that hard to guarantee them access to those, it's just that you need to think a little bit about coding when you are doing your no code, because, like I said here, no code doesn't really mean that you don't have to bother with the code at all. It's speeding you up, but a part of responsibility remains. And it's also a good fun in many ways, because if you think about it, to hear from a customer who says, you know what, you've really improved my life. I've been trying to use an app like this for a year and I couldn't. And now because you made it accessible, I finally can. That's, that's just heartwarming. It's incredible. So I hope you all get that at some stage of your career. Always think about those marginalized groups accessing your services. People around us have all sorts of different problems. They have to live with different conditions. The climate right now, as we know, isn't that great for pretty much anything, so we can make a little difference, and I think it's totally worth it. And that's pretty much from me, but I know that Ollie would like to say something. So thank you very much for your time. I would be more than happy to answer any questions.
Zoom still needs like a kind of a round of applause button that I can press, to kind of give you a cheer, because it's just awesome.
Thank you.
I learned so much during that, and I thought I knew a lot,
Thanks a lot, folks.
There's loads of things that I can, take away and use in my project, certainly. And I think I do really, it's kind of given me a glimmer of hope, having you look at some of these tools, because my concern was, I think there's kind of two angles to this, no code and accessibility, that making sure that platforms that we use are able to be accessible, and making sure that people who are using them understand, how to, accessibility best practice. And to hear, about how Webflow and Bubble, actually some of that functionality does exist, it warms my heart. Other platforms, maybe less so, but, we need to, it sounds like
the degree varies, so it's like, it's worth remembering that actually not all platforms would allow you to dig that deep in order to, to make your solutions, your final products accessible. And it's something that personally I would take into consideration when choosing a platform for my no-code project. I know it's maybe not easy to estimate whether, it is allowing you to build accessible services or not. Does it allow you to do that? But, stay tuned. However, this is super important, because you can improve so many lives by just, doing little tiny things. I mean, it's so worth it.
For sure. So if people have questions, you can ask them in the chat, or you can use the Zoom raise your hand function.
Yeah, go for it.
There's a specific question that's just come in from Fiona, which I think we might struggle to answer, to be honest, because it's about Flutterflow, the tool, which I'm not that familiar with, and I'm guessing, Wojtek, you might not be.
No, I haven't really heard about Flutterflow, but Fiona, if you want us to look at a specific tool, get in touch with us afterwards. You can find us on LinkedIn, or, you can email us and just, pick the conversation where we've left off. So like, just, send us some links and we'll have a look. Generally, I mean, Ollie is very optimistic about this, just because of, how much stuff I've seen being in this industry for years, and accessibility being my main interest right now, and for years, actually. I tend to be a bit less optimistic. Most tools that are focused on providing no-code solutions do not really allow that great degree of flexibility, and it's almost like a domino effect. People who created them in the first place were very enthusiastic about providing people access to super quick tools. And so they didn't really pay much attention to accessibility in the first place, because that wasn't their main goal, Sometimes they also lacked education or awareness of those issues. Having said all of this, the situation is massively improving. So like, this is going to be pretty big and important, right? I'm just saying that right now, if I were to kind of, guess whether Flutterflow allows you to build accessible solutions or not, I would be like 70% doesn't, 30 does. But I'll be happy to check for you.
Well, let's see. Like, let's try and keep that statistic in mind, and see how things change over the next few years.
Sure.
Like, we can get these tools thinking more about this stuff. Are there any more questions from the audience about implementing accessibility, or more broad questions? I'll give a few seconds for people to ask.
I would really, encourage you to ask them, because you have a pretty good occasion to get a pretty good answer, I would say. And at the same time, I know this is new to some of you. There are no stupid questions. Take it easy. Just ask anything, seriously. We'll try to help.
Oh, so do you see this? What are the three main issues you come across with a no-code app?
All right. Okay, three main issues. Like I mentioned, first of all, lack of operability through keyboard. That's absolutely number one everywhere. This is actually the biggest problem with the entire internet, as far as I see it. Without the mouse, some of the functionality is just not available to you. Then the second thing I see very often are broken forms. When we build no-code tools, when we use no-code tools to build applications or websites, very often we do it with the intention of capturing some data, most likely for, you know, a good reason, but anyway, there would be forms in there. And very often those forms are inaccessible. Labels aren't connected with appropriate fields. Error messages are not meant to be understood by a human being. Or for instance, they sound like this field is required. I mean, having an error message of this field is required is, I mean, just don't do that, right? It doesn't tell you anything. Rather than that, say, please enter your email address, please enter your password, or the password you've entered was wrong, please try again. You know, give a person a meaningful error message. And the third thing that I think the internet suffers from greatly, and also that applies to no-code solutions, is actually a pretty poor information architecture. And designers, that being us, you, me, Oli, designers using well, kind of thinking more about the visual presentation rather than the meaning of things. And let's say instead of using a heading, just taking a paragraph or a content of a div layer and increasing it, you know, changing the font size so it's big and looks like a heading, but it's actually not heading. Underneath, the semantic meaning doesn't hold, it doesn't mean anything, which is in effect a problem for pretty much any assistive technology you can imagine. So this is actually the sort of the hard part of it. I would still argue that even if you want to use no-code tools, you need to understand a little bit of HTML. You just, I mean, you can do it without it, but it will result in pain. So it's worth looking at things like MDN, Mozilla Development Network, with their spec. Or maybe, you know, having a look at some free HTML courses. There's an excellent one from W3C that you can look at edX. It's superb, you know, and it will give you all the necessary basics. You really don't have to go any further than that. Just a little bit to understand how this stuff actually works. If I may, Oli, before we kind of, you know, get to the next question, if there's any, it's like cooking something. You know, you can go to Tesco and buy a lasagna or, you know, whatever you like eating, spaghetti or a pizza, and you can then reheat it and voila, you have a pizza. But if you learn how to actually make it from scratch, first of all, you'll know that this thing you brought in from the store is and secondly, you'll be able to make it so much better yourself. And that's exactly the same analogy, you know, and it's going to be better, and all your friends will love you for it. If you just reheat a pizza like that, you know, at a party, you know, so.
So we're going to finish up now. But I just want to say, like I said, you know, I couldn't find much information about accessibility and no code when I started, you know, looking into this. And just the fact that, like, I think we had like 150 people sign up for this webinar. It's given me a lot of hope. Like, people are interested and they want to learn more, and I think that's awesome. And I think, you know, maybe this is just the start of a conversation, as Wojtek said, you know, that we want to keep this going. We're going to follow up with you afterwards with the deck and with a recording once it's been processed. But if you have any more questions, feel free to message either of us. You know, we're open to chatting with all of you. And yet let us know your stories about what you're building and how you've implemented accessibility.
It'd be lovely. I hope to see you sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.